Have you ever entered a trade and felt certain you were right, only to watch the market move against you first, just enough to take you out, before continuing exactly where you expected? It feels precise. It feels unfair. It feels like the market saw you, like it knew where you were, like it waited for you to act and then moved. But it did not. For a moment, everything makes sense. You see the setup forming, you recognize the structure, you tell yourself, this is it, this time it works. This is the entry before the move begins. There is no hesitation, no doubt, only the quiet belief that you are finally early enough. So you act. You enter before confirmation, before the move is fully established, before the market has revealed itself, because waiting feels like risk and entering feels like control. And almost immediately, the market pulls back. Not violently. Not enough to invalidate your idea. Just enough to create discomfort. Just enough to make the position feel exposed. Just enough to test the exact place where you chose to act. And in that moment, something shifts. The confidence you had just seconds before begins to weaken. The clarity fades. The trade no longer feels like opportunity, it feels like uncertainty. You begin to question the entry, the timing, the decision, and without realizing it, you are no longer observing the market. You are inside it. My name is James R. Keene. I spent many years watching speculation unfold, not only through the movement of prices, but through the behavior of the men who believed they understood them. And over time, I noticed a pattern that appears again and again, one that most traders never recognize while they are inside it. They do not enter too late. They enter too early, not because they lack knowledge, but because they cannot wait. Because the moment before a move begins feels like the moment that must be taken. It feels like opportunity at its purest form, untouched, unconfirmed, but full of promise. And that is precisely why it is dangerous. Because the market does not reward anticipation. It rewards patience. At first, it feels like progress. The trader believes he has learned something important, that waiting too long was the problem, that entering earlier will give him the advantage he was missing before. It feels sharper, more precise, more aligned with the movement itself. This is it. This time I'm ahead of it. He watches the market differently now. He is no longer waiting for confirmation because confirmation feels late. It feels like something others are already acting on. Instead, he begins to focus on the moment just before it happens, the quiet space where the move seems ready to begin. And that is where he chooses to act. The setup is not fully formed, but it looks close enough. The structure is not complete, but it feels clear enough. The idea is not confirmed, but it makes sense. And in that space between what is visible and what is expected, he enters. It feels controlled. It feels like timing. But it is not, because the market does not move when it looks ready, it moves when it is ready. And the difference between those two is where most traders place themselves without realizing it. The position begins before the move does, and that creates tension. A small movement against him feels larger than it should because it comes immediately after entry. A pause feels like hesitation. A pullback feels like danger. And the trade that felt so clear just moments ago now requires attention, now requires management, now requires decision. He begins to adjust. He watches every tick, every small fluctuation, trying to understand what is happening, trying to regain the clarity he had before he entered. But that clarity no longer exists because it was never based on what the market had done, only on what he believed it would do. And belief does not hold a position. So he waits, but not with patience. He waits with tension, with expectation, with the need for the market to prove him right quickly. And when it does not, when the movement continues against him just slightly longer than expected, the pressure begins to build. This is where the pattern deepens. Because the trader is no longer reacting to the market itself, he is reacting to the distance between his expectation and reality. And that distance, even when it is small, becomes enough to force action. He exits, not because the trade has failed, but because it does not feel right anymore, because the timing feels wrong, because the confidence is gone. And in that moment, the decision feels justified. It feels disciplined. It feels like control. But the market does not respond to how something feels. And once the position is closed, once the pressure disappears, once the discomfort fades, the market begins to move again, in the direction he expected from the beginning. And he sees it clearly. What follows does not appear dramatic, yet it changes everything. The trader begins to notice that this is not an isolated event, that it happens again and then again in slightly different forms, but with the same result. And with each repetition, the feeling becomes more familiar, more frustrating, more difficult to ignore. At first, he searches for a technical answer, because that is what seems reasonable. He adjusts the entry, refines the level, waits a little longer, then acts a little sooner, convinced that a small correction will solve the problem. This must be it. This is the missing detail. But the outcome does not change. He sees the move forming, he feels the same pressure building, he enters just before it happens, and once again the market moves against him first, just enough to create doubt, just enough to make the position feel unstable, just enough to force him into a decision. And once again he exits. Not because the idea was wrong, but because the timing did not feel right. And once again the market continues without him. This is where something deeper begins to shift. The trader is no longer focused only on the current trade. He begins to carry the memory of previous trades into the next one. The discomfort is no longer new, it is expected. The hesitation is no longer a question, it is a warning. He starts to anticipate the pain, and in doing so, he changes the way he acts. He waits longer, but now the entry feels late. He enters sooner, but now it feels rushed. He hesitates, then reacts, then adjusts, trying to find a balance that always seems just out of reach. Because the problem is not in the entry itself. It is in the moment he chooses to act. He is no longer responding to what the market has done. He is responding to what he believes it is about to do. And that belief is shaped not only by the chart in front of him, but by every previous moment where he felt the same pressure. This is how behavior becomes predictable. Not because the trader lacks understanding, but because his actions are now guided by something other than the market. He is influenced by memory, by expectation, by the need to avoid what he has already experienced. And when those forces begin to guide decision, clarity is no longer enough, because clarity belongs to observation. But he is no longer observing. He is anticipating. And anticipation places him exactly where the market has not yet moved. The market does not punish him for seeing the move. It punishes him for acting before it exists, for stepping into the space where nothing has yet been decided, where structure is still forming, where direction has not been confirmed, and in that space, every position becomes fragile. At this stage, the trader begins to feel something he cannot clearly define. It is not confusion because he still understands what he sees. It is not fear because he believes he is acting with intention. It is something quieter, something closer to tension, the sense that he is always slightly out of place, always just before or just after the moment that matters. And that feeling begins to guide him. He watches the market closely, searching for the moment when it finally moves without pulling back. When it finally confirms without hesitation, when it finally behaves in a way that matches his expectation from the beginning. But the market does not offer that moment in a way that can be captured. Builds, it tests, it delays, and in that delay the trader acts. He enters before confirmation because waiting feels like losing. He exits after discomfort because holding feels like risk. And in between those two decisions, the market continues to do what it has always done, moving in its own time, not his. This is where the imbalance becomes clear. The trader is trying to align himself with the market, but he is doing so from a position of anticipation, not observation. He is reaching toward the move instead of allowing it to come to him, and in doing so, he places himself exactly where the uncertainty is highest. That uncertainty creates pressure, and pressure creates action. He adjusts his position, not because the structure has changed, but because the feeling has. He reduces risk, closes trades, re-enters, trying to correct what seems like a timing problem, but with each adjustment he moves further away from clarity. Because clarity does not exist in the moment of entry. It exists before it. Once he is inside the trade, the experience changes. The movement is no longer neutral, it becomes personal. Every fluctuation has meaning, every pause carries weight, and the position itself begins to demand attention. And that demand is what breaks him, because the market does not require him to act, but it makes him feel like he must. And when a man begins to act from that feeling, he is no longer following the market. He is reacting to it. And once that happens, the outcome begins to repeat, not because the market is unfair, but because his behavior has become consistent. After watching this unfold again and again, I began to see what most men never recognize while they are inside it. The problem is not that they cannot read the market, and it is not that they fail to see direction, because in many cases they see it clearly, often earlier than others, often with surprising accuracy. But seeing is not the same as being positioned. Because the moment a trade is taken too early, the entire experience changes. The position begins before the market is ready, and that creates a gap, a space between expectation and reality, where nothing feels certain, where every movement carries doubt, where patience begins to feel like risk. And that space is where most traders lose control. They do not lose because they are wrong. They lose because they cannot remain inside that gap without acting. They cannot sit with the discomfort of being early, with the uncertainty of not yet being confirmed, with the quiet tension that comes from waiting for the market to move. So they adjust, they exit, they interfere, and in doing so, they remove themselves from the move they had already understood. This is the part that confuses them. Because the idea was correct, the direction was right, the outcome eventually unfolds exactly as expected, and yet they are not part of it. They are left outside, watching something they had seen from the beginning, but could not stay with long enough to benefit from. And over time, this begins to feel like something else, like the market is working against them, like the timing is always wrong, like they are always just slightly out of place. But the market is not working against them. It is simply moving on its own terms. It tests before it moves, it creates doubt before it confirms, it pulls back before it continues. And those moments, those small delays, are not mistakes. They are part of the structure itself. The trader enters before those moments have passed. And when they arrive, he cannot stay. This is why the result never matches the understanding. Because understanding exists before the trade. But the ability to hold that understanding through uncertainty, that is something else entirely. And most men never develop it. Not because they cannot, but because they do not remain still long enough to allow it to form. In the end, the answer is quieter than most expect. It is not found in a better entry, or a sharper method, or a more precise signal. It is found in the space before action, in the ability to wait without feeling that something is being lost, in the understanding that not every moment belongs to you. A man can see the move clearly. He can understand it, anticipate it, feel that it is about to begin, and still place himself in the wrong position, not because he lacks skill, but because he cannot remain still long enough for the market to reveal itself. This is where the difference is made. Not in knowledge, but in restraint. Not in prediction, but in patience. Because the market does not move when it looks ready, it moves when it is ready. And that distinction is where most traders fail to align themselves, not because they do not see it, but because they cannot wait for it. They act too soon. They enter before the move exists. And once they are inside, everything becomes heavier. The movement feels larger, the uncertainty feels sharper, and the need to act returns, pushing them out of the position just before the market does what it was always going to do. They were early, and that was enough. My name is James R. Keene, and after many years observing the market and the men who believed they could anticipate it, I learned one lesson that remains unchanged. The market does not reward those who see the move first. It rewards those who wait long enough for it to begin.